In today's episode, I start work on the upper level, try my hand at uncoupling, and are the platforms long enough? Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, and welcome to episode 3 of my TT120 layout build. As I'm sure you know by now, this series is sponsored by TMC, aka the Model Centre. A big thank you to them for supporting the series, and more about them later on. Now, today it's time to start work on the most complicated part of the layout, the upper level. This is going to be quite a focal point for the layout, seeing as it'll not only be elevated, but it'll also house the large terminus station I've got planned too. So it needs to both look great and run really, really well. Because this is such a complex section, I'm going to break it down into smaller little tasks. So today I'm just going to focus on creating the upper section itself and laying the track away from the rest of the main layout, almost as if it was its own small model railway. Then in a future video I'll install it on the layout and put in the incline too to join it up to the rest of the layout. So without further ado, let's dive in. Now I know I've shown the design for the upper level on the track plan, but I wanted to start off by giving you a more visual idea of what this section will look like. So here you can see I've got a rough cardboard template in place on the layout, and I think this is going to work really well. Skipping ahead a bit, that cardboard template has now been cut from plywood, and there's a little bit of a gap at the back there, but that's not an issue as we'll need to have some cutouts anyway in case a train ever derails in the tunnel. And all of this is going to be covered up by scenery anyway. You can see the track has also been laid out in a rough position too to form the 3 different platforms for the station. I'm going to need as much length for these as possible so that I can fit the HST set or a Pacific loco and 3 carriages within the points. So to help with this, I'm going to use the Pico short radius points for this section, which will really help around the throat of the station. Now, as I said earlier, I'm going to build this section separately and join it up to the rest of the layout later on. I've already marked out the position for the points, so as with the previous track work, the first step will be to put down some neat PVA so that I can glue down the cork base. A strip of cork is then laid along the main length of the points, and I've tried to keep these as one single continuous piece where I can. For the second piece, I've cut the end at a very slight angle just so I can butt it up to the first strip while following the route of the diverging line. And then I'll add some weight to this while it dries. The track bed for the stations though are a lot easier, as these are pretty much just straight for the most part. Again, this was exactly the same process, PVA on the baseboard followed by the cork. And there will also be an island platform between the second and third lines, so that's why I've left a bit of a gap there. Meanwhile, just off the main station throat, I've got 2 short sidings which will be perfect for holding spare locos while they wait to take on their next train. And don't forget that this whole terminus station on the upper level is really acting as a scenic fiddle yard. I've made marks for the positions of the point motors and the frog wires, so now I just need to drill the holes for these. In one instance, I needed to add a tiny bit of track between 2 points, and this was to offset 2 motors underneath that would come really close otherwise. Now this looks really bent on camera for some reason, but I can assure you it's not that bad in real life. In fact, on the wider shot here you can see it doesn't look anywhere near as bad. This is the point that would go next to it though, and you can see how the motors underneath would really get in the way of each other if I hadn't just shifted one to the side. Now I'm going to try and lay these 3 points in one go so that I get them all in the right position as a unit, rather than having to adjust each one individually. Again, I'm using my double-sided tape technique to fix these to the baseboard. And before I lay the points, I'll just use a craft knife to poke holes in the tape where the motor arm and wires need to pass through the holes I drilled earlier. So here we go, time to lay all 3 points in one go. Getting these all in the right position at the same time was a bit challenging, but I definitely think it would have been harder to do them one by one. The 4th point can then be laid as well. And as you can see, there is still a little bit of adjustment to do. The track for the 2 loco sidings can be laid next, and I've already soldered wires to the rails which can be fed through corresponding holes in the baseboard. The track is then fixed in place using tacks. And I'll repeat this process for the 2nd siding too. You can see here I had the joiner sleeper already stuck to the tape, so it was a bit of a challenge to line up the track with this and then connect it up to the point. And for those wondering, these 2 sidings will comfortably hold both the A3 and the A4. Like the cork before, the track for each platform was a lot easier to do because these were just nice long straight sections. And these lengths were connected up to their corresponding point at the junction. In this case, I tried putting the joiner sleepers in afterwards, but you can see that was even more tricky with the double-sided tape. Lengths of flexible track from Pico are usually around 90 centimeters long, but here I need the platforms to be around 100 or 110 centimeters long, so there is going to have to be a track join halfway down. I've also put the feeder wires on either side of this join to help with the wiring later on. The holes have all been drilled, so now these can just be fed through to the underside of the board. And then the track is fixed down in position. So this is all of the track laid for the upper section, and really this could be a small self-contained layout in itself. The station lengths do look quite long at the moment, but even so I'm still not entirely sure how they'll look when filled. Obviously when a train arrives, the loco will be at the far end, so there needs to be enough space for 3 carriages and also another loco which can come in to take the train away. The HST set might be a bit tight as well, especially as the Mark III coaches are longer than the Mark Is. That said, I'll have plenty of time to check all this out later, but right now I need to get the wiring done. This episode, and in fact this entire series, has kindly been sponsored by the Model Centre, who are one of the UK's biggest model shops. They not only have a large online store with a huge range in all the major scales and gauges, including TT120 I might add, but you can also visit them in person at their shop up near Whitby, perhaps while you're up there to travel on the NYMR. But the Model Centre is also a really good option for modelers further afield too, as they offer international shipping. Since Hatton's closed down, I've had a lot of people asking if I know any model shops that do deliver internationally, and TMC is always one of the places I recommend, so it's definitely worth checking them out. I know there's a few of you who have asked that in the comments previously. You can find out more information on their website, tmcdirect.com, or click the link that's down in the description to go there directly. And again, thank you so much to the Model Centre for sponsoring this series. Underneath the board, currently the only wiring I have here are the feeder wires poking through from the track. Before we deal with those though, I'm first going to install a D-sub connector to the underside of the board. I did this on the main baseboard too, and essentially it means that instead of having to connect all of the wiring on this board one by one to the main layout, I can just run everything to the D-sub terminal and use one big wire to connect everything at once. I also need to install all the point motors around the station throat. Obviously the seep motors have a little bit of depth to them, so I had to be careful when planning the layout that these motors weren't going to interfere with the trains running underneath. And remember before when I said I had 2 points very close together? Well, despite offsetting them slightly, they were still just too close together, so you can see I've had to cut off the corners of the PCB board. The remaining point motors can then be fixed in place too. Before wiring these up, I just like to go down each tab and add a little bit of solder to the pad. This makes soldering on the wires a lot easier, which you can see I do in quick succession. As in previous episodes, I'm using PM1 point motors, and I have 3 wires for actually moving the point blades, and then another 3 to control the polarity of the frog. I'm sticking to the same colour coordination that I used last time out as well, just to keep things consistent across the entire layout. The other thing I need to do is actually solder the feeds to the frog onto the corresponding wire too. And when we take a look at the completed wiring for this section, yeah, it looks insane. Obviously this is because we have a lot of points all very close together, but essentially these are just the same 6 wires repeated each time. I find that if you tackle one at a time, it actually becomes a lot easier to keep track of everything, and the colour coordination really helps too. I do need to connect the power feeds for the frogs up to the main DCC power bus though. Technically this DCC bus isn't actually hooked up to anything yet, it's just running into the D-sub terminal block, but eventually this will be connected to the rest of the layout. The main bus wire can then be run down to the platform feeds at the other end of this board. Again, to keep things simple, I'll solder on all the red feeds to the one main red wire, and then I'll do the same for the black wires too. Finally, I'll add some insulation tape to the joints just to stop them from touching and short-circuiting. Because this is a terminus station, when a loco brings in a train, it'll need to uncouple before another loco can take that train away. So I'm going to have a go at installing some uncoupling ramps controlled by servo motors. This is actually something I've started working on for my 00 gauge layout too, and I'm working on a proper video for that, so I'll explain the process in more detail then. Essentially though, I'm going to have a small piece of bent wire get pushed up by a servo motor underneath the baseboard, and this will hopefully act in exactly the same way as an uncoupling ramp works, but it'll look a bit more discreet. With the holes drilled and wire bent to the correct shape, I can connect these up to a servo motor on the underside of the board. The motor plugs into a little servo controller which has a button on it, and when I press this, the motor moves back and forth. I can also control this remotely too by soldering on wires to these pads that eventually I'll run back to a push button on my control panel. In addition to the switch wires, I've also got power running to each of these boards too, and there'll be 3 uncouplers, 1 for each platform. With everything installed and the board back up the right way again, I'll just add a small square of acetate to the bent wires to act as the ramp itself. I can now do a quick test with some carriages which I'll just stop over the ramp. When the servo is triggered, it pushes up the tails of the couplings, allowing them to uncouple exactly as I had intended, so that's absolutely great. Meanwhile, at the other end of the layout, I can now trim down the rods from the point motors. I do like using the Dremel for this, as when I tried using cutters in the past, I was always a bit worried about damaging things. The Dremel is also really good at grinding down the excess too. You just have to be careful not to let the heat generated melt the plastic on the point. Finally, the points can all be ballasted, and I'm going to do this again using my quick and easy method of adding the ballast directly over the point and letting it stick to the double-sided tape. Ideally, I should have painted the rail sides before doing this like I did in the previous episode, but I was working to quite a tight deadline here, and I'm confident I'll be able to do this later on with a fine brush when I do the rest of the track too. And of course, when I come to ballasting the rest of the layout, I can blend things in nicely to these existing sections too. And the reason that I want to ballast these parts as soon as possible is so that the tape doesn't lose its stick or pick up any dust. Once all the ballast is down and the tape is completely covered, I then just clear up the excess using a handheld vacuum, and we get a nicely ballasted point. So like I said at the start of this video, today I'm just working on laying the track on the board for the upper section, and in the next video I'll actually focus on installing this onto the main layout and doing the incline up to it as well. The great news though is that if you can't wait, you can actually watch that next episode right now by becoming a channel member. You'll get early access to each new episode in the series as it's released, as well as exclusive videos too that can't be seen anywhere else. Also, it's worth mentioning that when you do get early access to new episodes, you don't get any YouTube ads when they're only available to members. So if you don't like having to sit through the ads that YouTube puts in these videos, it could be a good option to not only see things a little bit earlier than everyone else, but without those ads too. It costs just £1.99, so a pretty good deal in my opinion, and like I always say, it's less than the price of a single cup of coffee, and it'll last much longer too. So yeah, if you want to check out all the details before you make any commitment, there's a link in the description, and hopefully I'll see some of you in the members area really soon. So to finish up this episode, I've temporarily put the upper level in place on the main layout. This gives us a really good idea of how the finished section will look, although it won't actually be as high as this when I make the proper support structure. I have to admit though, it looks great with the mainline trains disappearing underneath it and then reappearing on the other side. The tunnel is long enough that the trains are out of sight for a little bit of time, but it doesn't cover up so much of the layout, so you can still see trains for most of the run. I'm also very happy to report that all of the lines for the station are long enough to accommodate the length of trains needed. Even the HST with 3 carriages fits, so I'm very happy that this won't cause any of the points to be blocked when a train arrives. In the next episode, I'll be joining this upper level to the rest of the layout and also building the incline so that trains can get up here. And like I said earlier, you can get early access to that video right now by becoming a channel member. That's it for today's video though, and if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with this layout build. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!